Hey everybody, my name is Tim Scherrer. I'm an author here in Boone County, Columbia, Missouri, and I put out a book right as the pandemic started about the American Civil War, specifically the situation in Boone County, Missouri. Um, and I did a video actually for my first book. My first book is Crash the Gate Doing 98. Is about Citizens Band Radio. So it's America's first social media platform. That's my first book. And there's a nice video on YouTube about it that I recorded at the Columbia, Missouri Library and had it edited and things like that. And my second book came out right as the pandemic started. My second book is Border State Quandaries, The Complicated Life of Dr. Samuel Allen During the American Civil War. And I haven't been able to do anything with that book, mostly because of the pandemic. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about that book and see, let people know about it. And if you're interested in actually getting the book itself, it's published via Lulu. And all you have to do is go to the lulu.com page and just type in my name, Tim, Scherrer, and I'll come up with the different copies of it. And notice that for my first book, there's a hard and a soft cover, and then there's a soft and hard cover of my second book, and there's also an ebook if you're interested. Also, it's available on Amazon. So, so that's where actually you get it. So. The bigger picture of this entire story is the American Civil War and border states. Border states sat between the North and the South and were usually very, very contentious. And in this case, Missouri, a border state, had not only counties that leaned one way or the other. You also ended up with townships that leaned one way or the other. And also, I would say that the borders also went down as far as fence lines for some people who may believe one thing or another. So, and Missouri gets embroiled in a civil war that occurs for quite a bit of the Civil War. Usually by 1864, the Civil War is pretty much decided in the state of Missouri. There's initially a phase of traditional military campaigns that happens early on, 1861, maybe going into 1862. But then for the next couple of years, guerrilla campaigns, secessionists kind of popping up. You get into the Bloody Bill Anderson and those kinds of activities that occur. And then finally, there's another military phase, which occurs with the Sterling Price raid in 1864. And then pretty much the Civil War is mostly settled as far as military action in the state of Missouri. So if you aren't familiar with the area that I'm talking about, if you're from another part of the country or even another part of Missouri, Columbia, Missouri is in the middle of Boone County. It's the county seat. And our main highways that go through here, which of course didn't exist back then, is I-70, and over this direction would be Kansas City, and this direction is St. Louis. Columbia is pretty much situated exactly between Kansas City and St. Louis. And then Highway 63 goes to the north. The county itself, Centralia is barely in the county. It kind of runs down this way. I believe Millersburg is still in Boone County. The county line is somewhere over here. And then there's a creek, Cedar Creek, that comes along through here, and that generally is the southern border of Boone County. Hartsburg really didn't exist back then. Ashland was a fairly new development, but the area we're talking about is this area on the very, very southern tip. And here's another map that shows the different townships. Here is Cedar Township. Is down here. And Cedar Township tends to take on the characteristics more like its neighbor county, which is Callaway County. If you aren't familiar with Callaway County, Missouri, Kingdom of Callaway, very southern leaning area that eventually negotiated a truce to keep the Union forces out of there, as long as they would keep their guerrilla activity out of the county. So that's a whole nother story that I would refer you to other places to. And um, so my book is really about Cedar Township, the southern part of Boone County. Now, Boone County itself had two different major events during the Civil War. The first one would be the Battle of Mount Zion Church. Mount Zion Church is up towards Hallsville. It's northeast of Columbia, maybe about 10 miles. It happens in 1861, December, and is a conventional battle where the Union defeats the Confederates and they end up retreating. And the next event would be the September 1864 Battle of Centralia Massacre, which is where some Bloody Bill Anderson's group comes in and stops the train, and that's going through Centralia, and they actually end up capturing actually Congressman Rollins, who ends up in the story, as I'll get to a little bit later, although that the part with Dr. Allen occurs earlier than the Centralia massacre. But catastrophic loss for the Union Army. Almost an entire force is wiped out. And there's a lot of information. Centralia has a nice historical society. They put out a lot of information. Battlefield preserved. Also, Mount Zion, the battlefield's preserved. If you want to go look, or it's not preserved, but the church is still there. There's a marker. You can kind of trace what happened there too. But so those are kind of the bookends for what happens in Boone County. But there's a lot of guerrilla action that occurs in the middle of all that. And guerrilla campaigns are very, very difficult, as the U.S. military has even found in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and also in Vietnam, in that it's really almost a game of whack-a-mole. Things will happen and you'll respond with military force. And it's always a balancing act to make sure that you do enough, but not too much, to anger the civilian population and create more guerrillas that are against you. Also, one of the things that we found in Iraq and Afghanistan is these sorts of situations are very good for people to settle scores against people they don't like. So if you have someone you don't like, that's you're in business, trying to do better than them in your business. You're a competitor of theirs, or maybe if there's a neighbor that you don't like, or someone's made you mad, or someone's crossed you, you can always report them to the authorities, and then that brings down either law enforcement or the military on them, and creates lots of hassles for them. So that's another thing that occurs, and I think that may be what leads to the situation with Dr. Allen. So who is Dr. Samuel V. Allen? He was born in 1809 in Botetourt County, Virginia. Forgive my pronunciation from that. That county is actually a rural area in Western Virginia. It's near the West Virginia border. And I looked to try and find which family he came from. There are 4 possible families, and 3 of them were slave owners. Now let's just talk about the issue of slavery for just a minute. Dr. Allen was a slave owner. He's a native Virginian. And I think you have to look at people for the full context of their life. And some people would just, oh, he's a slave owner, he's a horrible person. And I don't know him as a person, but you have to judge people for the full context of their life and everything that they've done. And I'm sure people will look back at us and judge one way or the other on certain things that we have no real cognizance about regarding our own lives. So he was a slave owner, and that's a horrible thing. People should not own other people, but that's just part of the story. Okay, now I made that statement. So he's born in 1809, and there's about a 40-year gap in his life, and we don't know much about what happened to him, other than we know that he did travel 800 miles west, and he ended up in Cedar Township, Missouri, in Boone County. And then also he was a Mexican War veteran, which would have been in 1847. At that time, he would have been about 38 years old. So He became a medical doctor. Now, back then, there were really two ways to become a medical doctor. The first one would be to go to medical school, as is done today. And the second one would be more of like an apprentice structure, where a doctor would study under another doctor and then eventually begin to practice on their own. And as far as I can tell, I can't find any medical records that show that he actually went to a medical school. So I'm guessing he went more the apprentice route, more the country doctor kind of route. So he buys his first piece of property on the 7th of January, 1850. He buys about 80 acres, and that land is still it's pretty easy to identify today. Go to my maps here. And okay, so let's just go into this map, modern day map. And if you're from this area, this will be familiar to you. So you drive south of Columbia, heading towards Jefferson City, which Jefferson City is not that far away. It's just right there. You go down here, there's actually a Gulf station, gas station that's located right there. Dr. Allen's property was this area right here. There's a golf course called Eagle Knoll that's in that area, and his land actually was on the verge of the boundary of the golf course. So as you drive by on Highway 63, look to the right, you see that Gulf station. Go a little bit north of there, there's a very nice house, piece of property there. That's the land that he actually lived on. Okay. So he buys 80 acres, and then he increases the size of his property. And then he marries a woman named Armatisa. I'm guessing that's how you say that. That's his wife. And by the 1850s, the census shows that he has 2 sons. And he also attended New Salem Church, which is still an active church in that area. Again, as you head south of Columbia, heading towards Ashland, you'll see this on the side of Highway 63. Still a lot going on there. My guess is that Dr. Allen is actually buried in that cemetery with his wife. And understand, this is not exactly close to his property either, especially back then. It's probably a, I don't know, 8 or 10 mile trip for him to get to church. So kind of a, kind of a big commitment to go up there, but it's a Baptist church. And it's still very, very functional and very active today. By 1860, Dr. Allen's been not only very productive in terms of his practice and acquiring more land, but he's also been very reproductive in that he has 5 children, and he adds another one by 1862. 1850, the slave census shows that he owns no slaves, but by the 1860s, he has a 45-year-old female, a 23-year-old male, and a 4-year-old that are working on his property there. He buys more land in 1861 and 1862, so he's got quite a different divestment of work with his medical practice, and then his farming, and then also with whatever land that he's operating. He's got quite a bit going on. He is one of the wealthier people actually in Southern County at that point. Let's talk about the Civil War in Cedar Township. 1861, Civil War's up and running. And there's a store in Cedar Township called Tuttle's Store. It's owned by both a judge and a brother. And they end up closing it because of there's some political differences that are occurring. At least that's how it's listed. So it ends up being closed for a couple of years. And finally, they come back in 1864 and reopen the store. And then they end up getting robbed 4 different times after that. 3 times by Confederate forces and once by Union forces. And finally, the Tuttles are like, forget Cedar Township. So they pack up and they move to New Mexico and Montana and continue their business. Probably a good decision for them if you get robbed. And there wasn't a whole lot of insurance then either. So. 1862, are key events that occur which involve Dr. Allen and leads to his situation. There's a raid on the 22nd of May on Stonesport, which is an area located just north of Claysville, which is down on the southern boundary of Cedar Township on Cedar Creek. And the Union forces of the 9th Militia Cavalry end up surprising some secessionist guerrillas, Confederate forces that were training there. And they end up capturing 8 Confederates and 7 horses. And the key player in that is actually Odin Guitar. Show you a picture of Odin Guitar. That is not Odin Guitar. This is Odin Guitar. So he's a well-known figure in Columbia, and he is a prominent member of the community. And there's actually a building downtown Columbia named the Guitar Building. It's right across from the Boone County Courthouse. And also his property was operated as a bed and breakfast. It's in Northeast Columbia. So that still exists out there. Okay, so that raid occurs. 8 Confederates and 7 horses are captured. In 1863, the home of William T. Nevin is raided by a force of Union cavalry from Jefferson City, which is not that far away. It just crossed the river and up about 12 miles. So they raid the home. They shoot Nevin. They burn his home, and the father and a man named John Sappington are taken prisoner. Now, John Sappington also attended New Salem Church, and I'm sure that Dr. Allen also knew him. So this is becoming quite personal, at least. And then some Union forces then skirmished near Boonesboro, skirmishing all day, and eventually the Confederate forces ended up retreating away. So stuff is heating up down there. In 1864, a resident of Cedar Township shot a Southern sympathizer. So then the Union Army comes down and they kill another man. The Union sympathizer then gets shot by bushwhackers. So lots of sniping and going on. And then there's an attempted robbery, things like that. That happens in the spring of 1864. And then on the 3rd of September, now understand this is about the time of the Sterling Price raid, some secessionists are recruiting. Speaking of the Sterling Price raid, Sterling Price actually goes up and plans to attack the capital of Missouri, or former capital of Missouri, Jefferson City, and he's repelled. He doesn't actually attack it because it's well defended. So then he eventually moves along the river and attacks along Booneville and then Lexington, and then the battle, the different battles, the Battle of the Big Blue, Battle of the Little Blue, and eventually gets defeated. Understand that Sterling Price is moving along the rivers because that's the easiest place to navigate during this time. And also, I did a slave study using the census, 1850 and 1860, and the vast majority of slaves were located in counties along the river. So those are going to be the most sympathetic areas to the Southern cause, which is the case with definitely with Cedar Township. So on the 3rd of September, there's some secessionist recruiting, and Odin Guitar's 9th Missouri Cavalry comes from Fayette. They stop at the Rockbridge Mills Distillery and decide to have a little bit of a drink there. And that's where Rockbridge State Park is. If you're not from Columbia, Rockbridge is an area, it's a large tunnel that goes from one side of a hilltop to the other. You just walk through an actual Rockbridge. But there was a distillery there and a spring, and they made alcohol. So they stopped in there and had a little bit of booze on their way south, which probably led to what happens shortly thereafter. They come upon a man named Harrington, who they end up killing because they think he's a secessionist. They caught another guy named Grooms. And Grooms sees what's going on and he runs, and he gets caught, hanged, but then someone cuts him down before he dies. and then they go to a home that they suspect of having some activity. Now, it's a Mrs. Edwards. Now, Mrs. Edwards claims that a public sale is going on, but they arrest four men. They hit the poor lady over the head with a rifle, and they knock around some of the other people that were there. And it was later revealed that Harrington was not actually a Southern sympathizer. So that was the last real event that occurs in the Civil War, at least known event of the Civil War in Cedar Township. And after the Sterling Price raid, pretty much the situation in Missouri is resolved in terms of Missouri's not really in play anymore. So things calm down after that. So now let's move back to Dr. Allen's situation. In January 6th of 1863, statements are taken against Dr. Allen. The Provost Marshal office has a Lieutenant Minnick who's going around getting information. And the gist of the story is this. Around the time of the Stonesport raid, which was in 1862, 22nd of May, that there were some Southern soldiers or guerrillas that were training, and Dr. Allen just happened to be there. And since he was a veteran of the Mexican War, and unlike veterans today who like to give opinions, they weren't doing it very well. So he basically says something along the lines of, hey, you guys are doing this wrong. Let me show you how to do it. And so he gives them a little bit of advice, a little bit of training, and that's what starts his trouble. So the provost marshal takes statements against him. And again, go back to that whole concept of people who don't like you, people who are upset at you, things like that. So the statements say that Dr. Allen supported the killing of a strong Union man. He gave 3 firearms to kill abolitionists, or another statement. And also, Dr. Allen was willing to pay a debt for a man to join the Southern Army. And also he provided a horn of powder to the Union. Or I'm sorry, to the Southern forces. Let me take a drink there. So by the time all these statements were taken, pretty much Dr. Allen was the Osama bin Laden of Cedar Township, at least according to all these different statements that are put together. So a warrant was issued for his arrest. He was arrested on the 28th of March, 1863, and he was sent to it's spelled Gratiot, Gratio Prison in St. Louis. And if you're from St. Louis or familiar with St. Louis, if you know where the Purina Checkerboard headquarters building is, just off of Highway 40 or I-64, it's a little bit south there as you just enter downtown St. Louis. That's the area that it was located in. We have a picture of the prison. Give me a second to make all this work. Oh, that's General Halleck, who is actually in charge of it. Here's Rollins, and here's the prison. So he's taken there, and he writes a statement to defend himself. Now, what's occurring inside of state of Missouri is this guerrilla war, and it's under martial law. And in fact, several counties were ordered to be depopulated on the Kansas border. But at that point, Henry Halleck was the general in charge of the Missouri Territory. So in 1863, Halleck asked for a legal study of guerrilla warfare and tries to give some legal guidance to his soldiers that are actually operating in the field, because you have quite a bit of leeway when you're operating in the field. And he's concerned just about overreach and what's legal and what's not legal. It's a good thing for a commander to do that, especially during this time when guerrilla warfare was really not as well defined as it is today. So Halleck creates General Order number 100, and and it states that military oppression is not military law. It is abuse of power. So you need to be judicious with what you do. You need to keep the order, but you need to not overreach. And that's a constant struggle when you're in guerrilla warfare, and that knowing what the real situation is and trying to handle it the best you can. So Allen finally arrives at the prison on the 8th of April of 1863, and about a month later, on 21st of May, he gets a letter of support from the former constable of Cedar Township, Henry Ferry. Writes the letter to a B.O. Austin, who then contacts the provost marshal office. Austin asks that Allen be released on bond and a loyalty oath. Allen only did anything wrong when he was drunk. Great excuse, huh? That doesn't work so well today either, but still, Allen's own statements say that yes, he did give away some powder, and he basically was just showing the guys how to drill, and that the statement on him paying the debt was inaccurate. His own statements try to refute everything. Austin's statement also says or recommends that he be released on bond with a loyalty oath. And Congressman Rollins can vouch for Allen the next time he is in St. Louis. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, what's occurring is General Schofield is actually now the general in charge of the Missouri district. Let me take another drink here. And Schofield and Lincoln are having a letter conversation about what to do. And Lincoln urges Schofield to have leniency for the people of Missouri and to not overreach, because in the end, this country, the country has to be sewn back together. So don't do things that are going to make it harder for that to occur. And so it is within this larger context. This is occurring basically at the same time that Dr. Allen is in jail down there at the prison in St. Louis. Another letter eventually arrives in May from John Sappington, who's his one neighbor that was involved with that earlier situation in 1862, and others. Says that Allen has small children. He's a community leader. He should be released on bond. So finally, that involvement, we're not sure exactly what involvement Congressman Rollins had in this, but his name is mentioned in it, so he may have actually sent a letter as well, or stopped by the prison and recommended he be released. But by the 14th of July, Allen is released by General Schofield on $1,000 bond. And if you take that and translate that into today's money, that's $250,000. So it's not a small amount at all. That's quite a bit for him. So eventually the Civil War ends, and Dr. Allen's been home for a while, and I'm not sure exactly what occurs with his slaves. He may have released them. They may have just run away. It's hard to say, but his slaves don't stick around. In Boone County, there were roughly 3,000 possible voters. So during the Reconstruction area, only 411 could actually vote because they were disenfranchised because of potential Southern sympathy. Dr. Allen kind of continues on with his land acquisition. He buys more land in 1866. His wife, Armatisa, dies in 1867. He ends up buying more land in 1868, and he gives some land to his son in 1870. So by 1870, he's got about 200 acres of land, which is pretty massive that day. It's unclear whether or not Dr. Allen was involved with there was an election riot that occurs in 1878 in Ashland, Missouri. But it happened right before his death, and he ends up passing away in 1880. So, and he's buried at New Salem Cemetery there, just off Highway 53. So that's the story of Dr. Allen and his complicated life and all the different connections, and what it took to get thrown in jail and what it took to get out of jail during this time frame in this complicated area of Cedar Township. Again, as it was divided by fence lines. So if you'd like to know more about the book, if you'd like to get a copy of it, quite a bit more detail. Here it is. This is the hardcover version. And again, I'll go back to, again, it's available on both Amazon right here and Lulu. I prefer you buy it off of Lulu because Amazon takes quite a bit of money of this. They take about 75% of what I would get on the book. And it's not like I'm getting rich off of this either. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this talk about my book. And, if you're interested, get a copy of it. I also have signed copies. You can reach out to me and I can send you a signed copy. Just send me a PayPal payment and I'll drop it in the mail for you. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this talk about my book. And, maybe I'll catch you when I write my next book. Thank you.